Well, let me just say it is David Morgan. If you don't know, it doesn't matter. But what does matter is it's the beginning of the year. It's the 3rd of January, 2020. And I have the honor of interviewing Clif High. Clif and I have known each other probably longer than most would expect or suspect. I actually was introduced to Clif through George Ure way back when, and it was from one of my subscribers that mentioned it. So I started looking into it, and I started getting Alta reports quite early on, back when the data was kind of in a set format. You would see things in brackets and brackets within brackets, and having a pretty good math background, it all made sense to me, and I could see the data showing certain areas that were really significant. Having given you that basis, it wasn't too much after I started subscribing to Alta reports, I got a consultation from a woman in Toronto, and the data sets were showing $600 silver. And this woman, of course, called me up and she wanted to know, who, what, when, where, and why. And I told her, well, my crystal ball broke on my way back to my office here. I really don't know, but it is, a significant number and it shows up in the data. So we're going to have a lot of discussion around that. But as I watched things progress and the reports get more and more, let's say, readable to the average layperson, I just kept in touch. And then at one point, Clif was generous enough to say, look, you do read my stuff. You do take it, somewhat seriously. No one's perfect, but if you want me to comp you, I will. And of course, I accepted that generous offer. I'd been paying for it for years, but again, he was kind enough to do that. So I'm going to make a few comments here just on the general markets, and then we're going to start talking about a lot of things, but I want to try to focus on silver initially and then move into the new electric. So for those that are looking at the end of the year, looking at what I do pretty much on sticking primarily to the financial side of things, the Dow was up about 23% for the year and the S&P was up almost 30%. But valued in gold terms, the Dow in gold was only up about 3%, and the Dow valued in silver was up about 6%. So the stocks did outperform both gold and silver, but marginally. What's interesting is to note what hardly anyone is going to tell you, and I will, that during 2019, the best performing stock indexes were the gold stocks. The GDX was up 40%, the HUI was up 50%, the GDXJ was up 40%. So if you really think about it, you would have been better off with your stock investments in the gold sector than in the general market equities, even the SPX or the DJI. Palladium was the big winner, of course, up 52%. I was right on getting in a little early or too early on getting out. I wouldn't risk anything in the palladium market right now. Platinum is still undervalued in my view, but it doesn't look, based what I know about the fundamentals, to be something you got to jump in right now. For the year, gold was up about 19% and silver up about 15%. And the big event of 2019 in this sector was that gold finally made it above the 5-6 year breakout point of 1350 that I mentioned on many of my interviews. But I want to make this more about Clif than me. I just wanted to set the stage as far as my part of this conversation, which is more or less the financial side. So Clif, what happened during all the input I get was you'd mentioned the new electrics several times, and I know you've done a couple of interviews on it, but a lot of people say, well, since silver is the best conductor of electricity, does the new electrics mean anything for the silver market? I kind of know the answer because I listen to almost everything that you do, but a lot of viewers don't. So if you could cover that and then just move into the, right in the microphone, what is the new electrics? What does it mean for society? What does it mean for the energy markets and everything else that goes with it?
Okay, sure.
In other words,
Okay. Yeah. We've only got, let's see, a whole year to discuss this.
Yeah. Sorry.
Okay, so no, that's all right. Right. So here's the thing: we can think of our world in a very curious way that focuses in and groups all of the things you've discussed, other than and to a certain extent, it does the Dow and the Nasdaq as well. But if we were to consider that most of our reality is made up of metals and a few gases in terms of the elements, that most of those metals can be broken off into one of three categories. Either they react to magnets, they don't react to magnets at all, or they react to magnets very strongly, such as iron. And so there's very few in this latter category. And then there's a bunch others that sort of seem to react to magnets, but are not particularly magnetic. And that's silver, the platinum metals group, all the way down to copper. Even copper has an affinity for magnets and can be manipulated in the materium that we're in with very strong magnets. Not in the same direction as iron. It doesn't leap over and jump to the magnet, but nonetheless, the magnetic pulse is felt through there. This is pertinent because the discussion in my reports going way back when was all about this subject called the new electrics. And it's much broader than simply electricity coming out of the wall and powering your charger for your Tesla, right? This form of new electrics is about something that was not obvious in the reports, but is becoming increasingly obvious as we go along. And that is that humans throughout our entire history have only worked with one half of what's known as the dielectric paradigm. Okay, so without getting too lost, there's Plato and Platonic solids, and then there's Aristotle and dynamic movement. And the two are basically two schools of thought. And the Plato and the Platonic solids leads up to what we call atomists, or people that think that light is composed of little tiny beads that come shooting out of the sun towards your eyes, or that all of the world is composed of little tiny miniature marbles that all clack together to form matter. On the other side, there's the Aristotle view of things, which is that everything is motion and that there's cohesion and uncohesion, if you will, okay, rarefaction. And this appears to be the real model of reality. Within the model of reality that we use now, the atomists, Einstein, Feynman, all of these guys have achieved one thing, and that is they made a bomb. And that bomb we call the atomic bomb, but it really is an electric bomb because there's no such thing as a nuclear force. What the atomists did, they invented nothing. Einstein has no patents. We don't use any kind of gear at all in our life that run off of any of Einstein's thoughts. E = mc squared is totally bogus. You cannot get energy out of matter. When we blew up the atomic bomb, we actually simply separated at a core level the atomic bonds between parts of energy that we in our ignorance see as solid matter. But the atoms, the atomic bits, so to speak, that were in that core nuclear explosion are still around. They still exist. All we did was separate the electricity that bonded them together. This was an electric bomb. All nuclear explosions are, in fact, electric issues. On the other side of the equation, we have Tesla. Everything in our modern world runs off of Tesla's thinking with a rotating copper coil inside a magnetic field. That was his genius. That was his instant spark of creative genius. That one thing. All of his inventions stem from that one concept. All of our reality stems from that one concept. The equipment we're using to communicate now exists because of that concept. So much for Einstein. He didn't invent squat. Tesla did it all. Tesla understood the ether. That is this fluid state that we exist in now. But that ether provides us with electricity. Even Tesla spoke, and he never had the chance to investigate it because he died too soon. But he said, going after electricity is something that is demanded of us now because we must increase the energy available to humanity. And he wrote this beautiful little book about how one may go about increasing energy for his fellow humans. He wrote very little. He was working all the time. But one of the things that he says in this, in his whole effort on all of this, is that we live in a world in which he's only able to explore one half or one out of three elements. Okay, one out of three aspects of this reality he explored, and he created every electrical device you've ever touched in your life and ever will touch. All are based on his work. And he only explored one part of this tripod, and that was electricity. The other part of the tripod is magnetism, which is why I bring all of this up, because Tesla spoke about qualities, quantities, and properties that would allow us at some point to deal with magnetism. So when we create electricity, when we take electricity out of what's known as the dielectric, we are in fact pulling electricity, but at the same time dealing with magnetism, almost as a side effect, we think of it. But in reality, the two are inextricably joined. You cannot have one without the other. You create electricity, or rather you extract it from universe. You're also creating a situation in which magnetism exists. We do nothing with magnetism. We throw it away. The metals you're speaking about, from copper all the way through the platinum metal groups, are going to be part of the new electrics, but the new electrics was never about extraction of electricity so much as it was about the ability to manipulate magnetism as a force within the material. The ability to concentrate the magnetic field lines such that we can make a force rod, if you will, or a hydraulic kind of a lift that would lift an object up simply by creating magnetic field lines underneath it that then coalesced and became coherent and caused it to rise up. And then you just turn them off and it's done, that kind of thing, right? It's an energy kind of an approach to things. We know that the universe is continually demonstrating that this principle exists within our material. And I happen to be fortunate enough to be almost killed by it, but to be able to witness it. Because just the other day outside of my window, a bolt of lightning struck the bluff about 20 feet away from the edge of my property. Okay, so just the other side of the property. I'm sitting there and I watched the whole thing unfold. And it's a misnomer to say that lightning struck. What actually happened was that first one or two, and then so rapidly I could not describe how fast it occurred, it became tens and then hundreds and then thousands and then tens of thousands of bits of electricity drew themselves up off of the bank of the area that I live in and shot into the sky. And it was a lightning bolt. So the lightning bolt doesn't come down and strike Earth. It wicks out and goes up. And so it is this ability to cohere these forces that the new electrics is all about. And that's where we get the ability to deal with gravity. That's where we get the ability to magnify energy, such as Tesla had done. He actually has in his patents devices that we can replicate now in much smaller form that are electricity magnifiers. So you give it a little bit and it extracts ever so much more. And so it's sort of what we might think of as a free energy or over unity device that's basically has been ignored. And that's where we're at right now. And this is why silver is so key. Because if we look at the spread from copper all the way over to the platinum group, all the way over into palladium, and even insofar as to go into the radioactives, just assuming that they were a continuing form on that, we're going to find that the metals, that we find that silver is in there, and it's very unique because it has these two native organic alloys that appear in nature. And in those, we find that there's a difference in how the silver molecule decides to express itself. And in one of them, that expression, and it's just a much smaller fraction of general silver, in that much smaller fraction of general silver, the expression of that silver atom is such that we get a different set of electrical qualities out of it, and probably a great deal different set of magnetic properties. Make sense?
Yes, it does. Well, tell us more. Will this be significant enough in quantity where it would put some industrial demand on silver from where we are now?
Okay, so here's our problem. All right, insofar as reading the Alta reports with the hindsight now about this new form of silver, I now understand why it occurs that silver in general goes up. And it's because the other silver, the other non-special silver, the more available form of silver, will be not considered to be valuable, but will be necessary what we process through that in order to get the other. Okay, so you're going to have to spend more for the ore, and in this case, our ore could be refined silver bars from which we might extract 1 or 2% of this different form of silver, if you see what I'm saying. Then the rest of the silver can go back and become coins again. It doesn't lose its value or anything, but it's not going to be as valuable as the other form of silver. And it has to do with the fact that you don't need much. Okay, and this is something I've been going through in this book that was first published in 1758, and it's magnificent, marvelous thinking. The guy is just incredible. It's this Joseph Boskowitz, and Boskowitz came up with this concept. Never had any kind of digital equipment or anything, all from thinking. He's a follower of Aristotle. He understands that everything in reality is dynamic motion, and that what we think of as solid and everything is basically just a snapshot of a state that's going to change in a minute, right? Anyway, so Boskowitz comes up with this idea about magnetic field lines. I don't know if we can see this. So these could be thought of as like regular magnetic field lines, okay? And the thing about magnetic field lines is that they're not the same out of the North Pole as the South Pole of a magnet. In one part of a magnet, I've got dozens of the things here now and huge, very strong magnets, but out of one pole in the magnet, you get what can be thought of as rarefaction, or right out of that part of the magnet is an expression of a magnetic wave that has a tendency to be repulsive or to be attractive. Okay, so the rarefaction means that there's very large spaces between these magnetic field lines. So there's like big gaps that other stuff wants to fill in. This is actually an expression of the ether around us being manipulated and being expressed through the dielectric in the form of the magnet. On the other end of the magnet, it's a compression wave that is repulsive. So that's why the two ends of the magnets want to stick together, is because the one that's sending out compression waves finds a natural affinity to the one that is sending out rarefaction and wants to suck in those waves. And so they join together. But here's a very interesting part of this. This is a secret that probably should be patented in some devices, but I'll go ahead and lay it out because I may not live long enough to be able to test this and produce an effective patent for it. But it is that you can produce a magnet through electric shock to neodymium that is so strong that there is no force on Earth that would allow two of those magnets to push their repulsive poles together. Okay, you could put so I could make two magnets. They'd be about the size of a soccer ball, and they'd be, like a loaf of bread shaped. We could strap one onto a forklift, onto the tines of a forklift, and strap another one on the tines of another forklift, each powered by those giant propane engines, so they got lots of torque. And you could aim those two with the repulsive ends at each other, and you could never, ever, ever bring those two forklifts together. They would skitter off, they would do anything. We could not compress that. And what's happening is that we would actually be compressing those magnetic waves together. We would be, if you will, agitating or irritating what's known as the dielectric. When you do that, vast quantities of energy pour out. And so here's the thing. We know now that capacitance is an issue of size, and smaller is greater. And so in my way of thinking, if we can create bifilar coils that are the size of postage stamps and incredibly thin and take leads off of them, we could put them between two compressive forces of big magnets, which I'm attempting to do here, and strap those magnets so that they just sit there and basically cause the dielectric to continually vibrate, so there would be no moving parts for a generator. And you could pass a 12 volts across the bifilar coil and pull off 120 volts and plug your house into it. Okay, with just these giant magnets, because the active force, the magnet, is actually continuing to irritate the dielectric. So you can think of it as there's something that is an annoying thought that you cannot get rid of. It's a song, it's, you know, something that your boss said at you or whatever. It's continually causing, there's no thing there, it's not solid, but you know it has force in your brain. And that's what the magnets kind of are to the dielectric around us. They're like that annoying, irritating jingle from a commercial you can't get out of your head that just keeps the dielectric spinning out electricity to us. And so that form of silver, I'm thinking now from those reports that smaller form of the naturally occurring alloy will be used in these little tiny ability to extract vast quantities of energy. And it'll relate to this aspect of magnets. I also think the new magnetics is going to be about learning to do things with probably crystalline structures, and I can go into why if we care to get into that detail, plus magnets in order to cause, basically use like crystals as a focusing lens for magnetic waves so that we can get coherence where coherence didn't exist before. So we might be able to create, if you will, the laser version of a magnet or a tractor beam. That would probably be a tractor beam or a repulsor beam. And it'll probably be done with some form of electrified shock being given to a crystal that doesn't destroy the crystal, but forms it into a state very akin to a permanent magnet, the same way we do an electrical shock to a neodymium.
Well, I like to stay on the new electrics from a different perspective, and that is, we're talking about the most important commodity out there, and it's not metals, it's energy. So what does this do to the powers that want to be or the powers that be with their oil monopoly?
Here's the thing. It doesn't do anything to them. Okay, they're dying anyway because of the currency and the situation, the debt loads and so on. They're going to continue on that path. All it does is apparently create what I had called sci-fi world. Now, perhaps that was a misnomer, okay? Maybe because there's a context in my brain for sci-fi world that might not exist in other people's. Maybe I should have named it, you know, Blade Runner lower level world. Okay, because we're talking about chaos. When we probably will get to a George Jetson and Judy Jetson with all the kids and the dog flying around in a little hovercraft kind of a thing, right? But between here and there, between getting to there, we've got a lot of social crap we've got to organize. Much of that is going to be driven by technology. So you can point to any number of social trends now that exist only because we've got phones. And so there's going to be even larger impacts as this stuff goes on. And the chaos that we're going to be living through is informed, driven, but not directed by the economics. So as the banking system is degrading and collapsing under the inverted pyramid of debt, driving it into the ground, we have to have something that is going to arise. This is just the way that the world works. So all of universe works. And Buckminster Fuller used to say, you know, invent the thing you would have replace that which annoys you, right? Be the change you want to see kind of a deal, right? We don't even have to do that. Universe creates that no matter, you know, so the revolution is created by the conditions of the giant monolithic state, and the revolutionaries themselves are created by that state reacting with its own citizens that forces them over into this camp. So it's this cycle that universe keeps us going under. We're in one of those right now economically. And the economics of the old system degrading, it's gorgeous to see that universe provided us with cryptocurrencies and a new system to uplift and go through that system as the old system collapses. So my expectation is over the next 10 or 20 years that we'll see the banking system becoming irrelevant. More and more and more and more people will become part of the greater unbanked, but they'll become much more effective because they won't need banks, because they will have replaced banks with their own initiative, a bunch of apps, and off they go. And new forms of commerce won't involve the old structures that required the banks, required the financing, and so on. One of the things that banking and all these other people did not understand was that their role in an information economy, the great information age, the great information highway is what the internet was originally called. But one of the things that people fail to understand is we don't need letters of marque, okay? We don't need financing. We don't need letters of credit. We don't need a bank to promote a middle layer of distribution, of warehousing, and so on in order to get a product to market these days. We've got crowdsourcing, we've got people creating their own brands, their own productions, and it's absurdly easy to finance this stuff on your own. And that being the case, as the banks die, we're getting into a situation where the superiority of the replacement will already have demonstrated itself. In a world of everybody working through their phones and electronics, why actually bother to deal with brick and mortar? Yet the banks are hamstrung because they must support this old existing infrastructure that's dragging them down as part of the destruction of their system. Maintaining all these old branches, the employees, et cetera, they cannot be competitive with the more nimble digital aspect of it all. So new currencies are emerging. This is what has the infrastructure very scared, actually, too, is that this stuff is emerging faster than they can control it, even though they think they control the media through which it emerges. But the smart ones realize that, it's gotten out of hand. It's out of their control.
Tell me more on that, because I'm hardly a statist, anyone that knows me, and I'm definitely for competing currencies. And, as old as I am, I mean, in the beginning of the end, as far as, the precious metals being tied to real money, we used to call it the honest money movement back in the day. That's what we used to call it in the 60s, or at least some of us. The point being that from my thinking, what's to prevent the state from their heavy-handedness coming in and saying, well, we don't like this crypto, you have to use this federally mandated crypto, all others are null and void. I mean, something like that.
Yeah, sorry, guy, it's technical. They can't, right? Yeah. It's like going, it's like if we had gold nuggets lying around on the ground and the government coming around and telling all the citizens, you can't pick up those rocks and give them to each other, all right? There is nothing they can do to technically stop any cryptocurrency. There's no way they can hamstring it. There's no way they can do more than annoy it, in the sense that technically, at a technical level, once the cryptocurrency is released, it has a blockchain, it has a certain amount of supporting nodes. Unless they were to round up all of the supporting nodes that kept it going, and even then, the idea would survive, and that the fact that the government's trying to get a particular cryptocurrency out of circulation would inflame its value and would incite other people to start mining it and so on, write their own code, etc., right? Because they would have seen history. So you would have gotten some bright guy who knows how to code that says, look, the first guys that coded this XYZ coin, why, they made a ton. And now the government drove it out of existence. But before they did, they made that ton 1,000 times more valuable. Let's write our own code and resurrect this thing on the sly.
This might be a really cruddy analogy, but I want to voice it anyway, and you can critique it. But if you go back to the 1933, many people call it gold confiscation. I mean, the federal government paid the going rate of $20.67 an ounce. Said you got to turn it in. You could go to jail if you don't. And they did grab a lot of gold, but there was a lot of gold that wasn't grabbed. As you said, a lot of those people took their gold, put it in a coffee can, and buried it outside of the kitchen, and Mama watched it the whole time she's doing dishes every day. So a lot of people just kept their gold and kept their mouth shut. So is that a fair analogy to what? Probably not. Cryptos are not as hamstrung as gold was in the 30s. Yeah. Okay, because gold at that time had been the system. All right, and then the system of gold was replaced by this weird thing they invented called Federal Reserve notes. It was called Federal Reserve dollars, and so on, but it was paper money.
And so gold was replaced by the paper money, and then later on, gold was allowed to be still within the system because you could insure it and you could take a loan out against it as collateral. That's how they confiscated the gold they were able to confiscate. It was insured and they had a paper trail for it. It was used as collateral. They had a paper trail for it. If there was no paper trail, people didn't worry about it. They hid it. Okay, now cryptos don't have that paper trail. Yes, there's the blockchains. Yes, you can write code to examine the blockchains, but the government doesn't have the resources, and these particular kind of resources to do this work need to be very highly paid and very highly motivated to do this. And it's not a very large technical pool, and from the government's viewpoint, the bad guys pay better. From the government's viewpoint, right? Cryptos pay better than the government ever will. I've run into this myself in many dealings over this last year with aspects of the legal system, government, and regulators that wanted to talk to me about a lot of this crypto shit, right? And I'm not being charged with anything. There's a lot of people that are. Okay, they're looking at a lot of people in the crypto world, but there's so many people in the crypto world doing things that might be able to be perceived as being against some current money law that they would maybe have to arrest, let's just say, 80% of the people messing with cryptocurrencies, right, in one way or another, in order to express those laws even remotely fairly. And this is one of their problems, is that they can't be seen to be biased against one crypto if they're pressing a particular crypto because of a particular kind of an offense. Then they really need to press that offense against everybody else. And so far, the government and its agents appear in the main to be way out of their depth and flailing around and thrashing their legs, just trying to keep their heads above water without a clue as to where they're going, which tells me there's no overall overarching strategy that's been devised, that's been pressed down to the level of the middle level investigators and, the technical FBI specialists and people that I've had to deal with. They're task oriented in any case, but the kind of questions they're asking and the kind of information that they're trying to discover tells me that there is no central focused goal that's being directed by multi-agencies in a coordinated effort on the part of government. Okay, that rather what's happening is that there's all of these minds that are getting into reactive mode because people are telling them that their turf is being potentially hassled by these cryptos and they'd better do something about it. So usually it's a supervisor who's getting some kind of even further level of supervision pushing on him, and nobody knows what the hell's going on. They don't even really have a coherent objection. And so what they're trying to do is to take the cryptocurrency world and force it into the cookie cutter of fiat currencies, and it doesn't fit very well. And if you try that, you can get everybody to squish through those cookie cutters, but you're going to have to, prosecute everybody, arrest everybody, shut down, vast quantities of stuff. And you can only do it in this country, so it'll continue around the rest of the world. And you get into all these other issues and so on. So basically, that cat is out of the bag. So our sci-fi world descriptor had multiple currency sets emerging through our next 10 years, okay? And we know that, and I mean, this is the horror of it, okay? And I'll get into some really terrible things, and we'll just briefly go over them. But at the one extreme end, human suffering is currency. And we see that organizations like John of God out of Brazil for 10 years, 20 years, traded humans as a currency. And then we go all the way through all of the other kinds of currencies, all the way out to the much more ephemeral, the software level of the cryptos. And somewhere up in here in the lumpy physical stuff, we have the fiat still struggling with gold. And that's going to be sci-fi world for the next 10 years. Only if we looked at this big sort of lumpy curve of what's going on, we'll find that there will be far fewer people messing with the crude, ugly, evil part of currencies that, in my opinion, go all the way up through fiat, right? But right. So those will decrease, but the rest of us, there'll be much more of the world that will be using these, and it'll be a gradual replacement.
Let me stop you there. I hate to interrupt, but I'm dying to get this question out. Very excellent answer. I got a much clearer picture now of why, because I'm a fairly deep thinker, and I was like, well, 'cause I certainly don't live in fear, but the idea that so, especially the way things are today, I mean, where someone could just basically come to your door and do darn near anything without a warrant or not. I want to get too down a rabbit hole here. So my question is, I'm dying to get out, is how do the gold, silver, platinum based backed cryptos fit into the overall picture in your view?
At this point, they're dangerous, okay, because but later on, it's going to be far less dangerous, and in fact, will become well, the gold standard. It'll become the physical standard, right? Okay, because as we go forward in sci-fi world, it can be imagined that there will be resources that will be extraplanetary, okay, that will be off our planet. These resources might be satellites, they might be asteroids that you are going to mine, something along those lines. It will at that point be necessary that we replace the banking system, which used to issue what I call letters of marque or letters of credit, okay? And I say letters of marque specifically because those were used to finance the great expedition and voyages, which were usually plunder. But in any event, it will be necessary when we're doing off-planet stuff that we have a vehicle, a medium, that will allow us to attach a digital asset here on Earth to something that's out in space, which may be headed our way by a bunch of asteroid miners pushing it or mining it or whatever, but there's going to be a necessary time lag in between there. And so there's all of those arbitrage issues that will arise because of that time lag and getting that stuff extraplanet down to the planet where it can be enrolled into our system and consumed. And then at another level, there will at some point become the necessity to do transactions that are off planet where everything will always stay off planet. And the whole life cycle of that transaction of a currency being attached to a dynamic action on humans to make more currency, all of that whole thing will always stay off planet and the rewards will be used off planet and so on. But it will still need to have that arbitrage capacity to be able to be folded into Earth's economy. That's the only way it makes sense for us down here on the planet to keep pumping resources out into space. And so as a result of that, we will need a class of storage vehicle where the goal, unlike other cryptocurrencies, the goal will be to make it as stable as possible and as immune as possible to the effects of whatever these things are coming in, right? So this is actually where metals-backed cryptocurrencies will allow us to find a solid gold asteroid, the size of one of Mars's moons, and actually feed that resource into our planetary system without totally destroying gold as an asset. Okay, and it'll be because we have the ability to manage that over time by using links between cryptocurrencies and the actual physical assets that admittedly are going to take time to move in through the system, but all of the churn can be done within the cryptocurrencies. There's an issue there in terms of dynamism. Okay, and that was a big aspect of sci-fi world, was that everything is dynamic, that we're no longer in a world where the idea of an asset is something that is stored in a hole in the ground for years after year after year after year, or a piece of art that just simply hangs on the wall year after year after year. Here you're after something that is dynamic. And so the shift of this age will be from the valuing, from what I think of at a very deep level, it's the battle between the atomists and the etherists, okay? The Platonics and the Aristotelians, okay? Because we're not going to lock ourselves up in solid forms. We're moving towards the management of fluid energy and the magnification of that energy. Because solid forms is a condensate. It's something that is just crystallized. It's never going to grow anymore. The only reason that solid forms in the past have grown is because that our population grew in relation to the solid forms. Now our population is so large that there can never be enough solid forms to go around. We don't have enough gold on this planet to put a 1 ounce piece in everybody's hand probably, right? And still maintain any other kind of a system. So under those circumstances, the value is the idea, the information, not the substance. And this will become ever so more clear as we go through these next 20, 30, 40 years, and we get to the point where it becomes common and understood to be common that an idea can allow you to create gold out of a machine.
Great. It give you a little feedback, you know, having two millennials. And
Poor fellow.
Not saying even though I'm their father, I know a lot about them. But, excuse me. But it's my perception that a lot of millennials value the experience over the hard form. In other words, they rather spend their money on a trip to the Grand Canyon and hike it for a week than to, you know, have a down payment for that automobile. They'll just Uber instead.
Right.
And that goes along the way I see your argument that, you know, this is more an Aristotelian type of idea than the Platonian, where, look, I don't want this rock to hang on to. I want to go walk through these rocks and have that experience. Could you comment on that?
Sure. Here's the whole thing, though, too, is that we've always known this, right? You die, you can't take it with you, but you can take that experience. Now, the millennials don't know this. They may know it at some core level that I can't perceive, but I don't hear many of them discussing it. But in the metempsychosis, in that period of time between lives, what we call the period following your entrance through the death barrier, your transition into death, in that period of time, there's this time that we can call your long sleep, where your energy is recovering, your consciousness is recovering, the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune here in reality. When you're in that long sleep, that's where those experiences become valuable, because that long sleep is perchance you shall dream. And it's good to have something to dream about other than having purchased a little lump of gold that you sat in the basement, right? And so much better to, you know, have used that same amount of energy instead of purchasing the little lump of atoms to sit in the basement, to, in my opinion, to have purchased that experience that maybe will lead to your death at some point, because you will seek experience that will take you beyond your ability to deal with it, right? But, you know, there's a lot to be said for that approach.
I'd like to shift gears a little bit. I only have about 15 more minutes.
Sure.
But what do you think about the way that this technology is pressuring us all to be looked at 24/7, and adding on to that the social credit system, where basically you have to agree with the state or your persona non grata? Where do you see that going from this point?
I'm the wrong guy to ask, okay? Because here's the thing, Guy. I'm a lot of things. I'm not an alpha male, okay? I'm a sigma male. That's the equivalent of an alpha male that basically can't involve themselves in the social situation. So I don't have children. My ties to the society are tenuous at best. And I've never understood that mindset anyway, being a schizotypical, okay? I've always been self-isolating. So the society is indeed moving that way. The social credit system is such that I've always lived under, as a schizotypical, I have always lived under a social credit system that simply was not formalized, okay? As we all live, for instance, let's all go back to our high school years, right? If you're not the top dog up there, then those top dog are putting down a social credit system that affects you throughout that period of time. Well, I was the new guy in 32 high schools. Because I'm moving all around this stuff and going back and forth and my dad's career and stuff, right? Most of my high school experience was in 4 institutions, but nonetheless, I had all these other high school experiences. So for me, I've always lived under social credit. And so as a schizotypical, I have evolved methods for dealing with that, for basically self-isolating, withdrawing, not being noticed by the machine. And maybe I should write a book on how to develop those skills, because they will be necessary. But I've always seen it as a terrible negative thing. It's as somebody who's worked in the industry of doing software at huge giant levels, Data was always our goal, the aggregation and the acquisition and managing and manipulating and chewing and slicing and dicing of data, which is always generated by the activity of people. So I've always known that the systems I was working on are basically munching on humanity's insatiable ability to spew out stuff. So one of our defenses is that. So I've thought about this a lot, the censorship on social media and how it impacted my system in terms of data gathering, and how it impacts the individuals that are currently creators on social systems, the words they can't use. So what do? They invent other words. They invent mannerisms or something to get that message across. Humans are very creative. If you cannot insult your master directly in the language that they say is the King's English, you shall invent Cockney rhyming slang, or you'll be a Burke. so anyway, and so we'll get around it that way, right? So there will always be those people that will be, as I said earlier when we started this, as the social machine rises, it will create its own revolutionaries. This is the way that the universe works.
Well, it seems that we have a lot to look forward to in this sci-fi world that we're coming into. It looks like the whole power structure is going to be discombobulated. Is that a valid word? I know. Yeah. And so if you don't mind, can you give us a bit of a summary? We've covered a lot. You're very deep. I followed, I think, almost all of it, luckily. But give us a, I'm not holding you to this, please. It's sort of like looking at an Alta report, and you get a, much better view after a 5-year time frame, as an example, than you did at the time it came out, because you have more knowledge. You've seen the data in reality, and you say, oh, that's what it meant. It meant that.
That's the part I always loved about that process. I hated doing all that work, but that's what always got me was, oh, well, damn, that's what was going to happen,
Right.
So it's nice to be able to look ahead on it. But over the next decade, let's not go much beyond that, right?
Please.
Okay, so we've got climate change over these next 4 years, moving out of the space that it currently occupies as a club to beat the society into a social order, to something that we will be struggling with, more and more of us, at least once or twice a year, to survive. So we can look forward up through 2024 or so to the increasing burden of the climate shift into the cold. And by 2024, no one's going to bother trying to talk about climate warming. The big topic will be, boy, I almost got it on this one. Next year, I'd better get this ready, right? Because it's going to be coming around again. And there will still be lots of discussion, lots of debate, all of that sort of thing. But the general tone of what we're describing as climate change will have changed. And that's going to cause massive changes throughout the social order. One of the things that people are not anticipating is going to be the flood of refugees back to Africa, back to the Middle East. And it's because they won't be able to take the cold. Okay, it's going to get to be a burden on food, on social systems, reduction of resources to people if you live in the Northern Hemisphere, and all of these kinds of combining issues will put pressure on individuals that are not genetically able to take it. It's changing too rapidly for them to be able to adapt it. They're going to really feel it, and more, there's going to be a little trickle, and then more and more of them are going to start to leave, just saying, it's too cold to stay up here and fight. It's just not worth it, right? It's one thing to be hot and in a desert and, lying around most of the day and then take a few pot shots. But when you've got to actively freeze and maintain calories and this kind of stuff in order to take those few pot shots, they're not worth as much to you, right? So the whole war aspect of it all becomes a different issue. And that's going to radically change things. Another thing that's going to radically change things is the manifestation of the climate in a way that people had not anticipated. In order to have an ice age, you got to have a lot more water vapor in the air. The water vapor's got to come from someplace. At the moment, it's coming from the oceans, and the oceans are going to start absorbing the carbon dioxide to some extent in that exchange. But we're also losing a lot of surface fresh water because of the bombardment of cosmic rays, the heating of local areas. And so the loss of the fresh water, though, is hemispheric. It's coming from the southern hemisphere, getting wrapped up into giant cloud structures that then head north. And instead of going to the South Pole and accreting and glomming onto the glaciers at the South Pole and along the Andes, and maybe Tanzania if you wanted to consider that. But instead of that, it's actually being drawn north by this drying cycle kind of thing, where we're getting new glaciers forming in the northern hemisphere that draws moisture out of the air, causes a lack of moisture, which draws the moisture from the south, and this big cycle starts. Plus, we've had that coincide with the change, the Pacific decadal change in the Pacific Ocean. And so all of these things are combining to create this effect. So Australia and the southern hemisphere is going to have to deal with more and more drying conditions and lack of fresh water. And they'll also see some aspect of their ocean water levels change, but it's not going to be like increasing water, it's going to be decreasing. We'll get more and more beach as we go along, but it'll be incremental. We won't really notice it that much. But the water lack will change everything for the southern hemisphere: growing patterns, food distribution, et cetera, et cetera. So we'll all be involved in it through the rest of this decade. Then at the end of this decade, everybody's going to have in 2029, we're all going to have a terrible period of fright and anxiety as we worry about a thing called Apophis, which is this near-Earth asteroid that's going to be very near. And it won't be so much 2029 that we'll care about, because it's not going to hit us. What we will care about is whether in 2029 Apophis gets moved by Earth's gravity enough that it'll hit us on the next go-round, which I think is 2041. And so there's a very, very, very narrow window that Apophis can slide through that won't cause perturbations in its gravity to cause it to pull around closer to Earth the next time. And we're down in that cycle where every time it comes around us, it gets closer and closer. So this will give everybody a great deal of fright and much to worry about, even though there's no danger in 2029, and any danger might not be until 2041. I think that was it. I think it was 41 is when it appears back next. We'll have to check that number. And then there's just tons of stuff. You know, Toyota introduces their flying car announcement this year in the Summer Olympics. We're going to have new forms of cheap electricity to the point where we'll start thinking about, okay, right now, we don't pay for electricity. We pay zero money ever for electricity. What we pay for is the maintenance of the distribution system. So now it's becoming technically capable that we can eliminate the maintenance of an electrical distribution system on the load, that burden on the planet, and still have electricity by being able to make safe, non-nuclear kinds of electricity that can be in little tiny boxes that can be plugged into your house or your car or this kind of thing wherever you want to have electricity. If humans could not monkey with that to create an electrical bomb, what we think of as a nuclear bomb, or make it into some kind of a weapon, government would love to get out of the electrical distribution maintenance business. It is such a huge headache you cannot imagine. It gives them such fright. And if everybody had power that was continuous, they wouldn't have to worry about maintaining it or any of this kind of stuff. We could all go on to doing much more productive kinds of things, right? And so we're right there. We're right on the cusp of that. As I was saying, the new electrics, and even I'm participating in it. I've got all kinds of gear here because who knows who's going to be the person that will be our new Tesla that will discover the next out of those three legs of the tripod. Tesla did electricity. The next one up is magnetism. And who knows, it might be some kid in the Ukraine. Could be somebody in Africa that gets a squirrely little idea, messes with some magnets, and the next thing you know, tractor beams, right? Because the power, the infrastructure, the ability to put power behind the device and make it modular and have the Chinese crank out 1 million of them is nothing anymore.
Well, I'm going to pause you there. I hate to, but I've got stuff coming up in about 5 minutes. So with that in mind, if there's anything you'd like to say as far as your channel, future Alta reports, a cryptocurrency comment or whatever, as long as you keep it brief, you've got the final word. And let me thank you publicly for taking the most valuable commodity of any of us, old men or young, women, whatever stripe, our time. So thank you.
our energy. Well, I'm doing stuff. I've been calling it my evil plan to take over the world, but I'm having to drop the evil because that's just too much work. So it's my secret plan to take over the world appears this year, and when it comes on out, it'll make a little bit more sense to individuals as to how we're approaching this stuff. I'm not doing alter reports. I've looked at using the deep web as a source because it's not censored. It's doable, but I'm too old. It'd take me 6 to 10 years to get the appropriate indexing. So it's not worth it to me. And I want to go on and do electricity and, this kind of thing. So basically I'm not doing that. I'm mostly doing stuff open source. I'm going to do some patents, but as soon as I've got them in a patentable position and the government's accepted them, I'll talk about them. And in essence, short circuit anybody's ability to use that technology for profit, because we'll open source it by handing it out, but there will be a patent so no one else can do it, right? Because I know this guy that invented this thing for a bus that kept all these kids from dying in crashes. GM came along and patented it right out from underneath him, and he couldn't make them anymore.
Oh my.
Because he never did it. Yeah, but good luck to everybody through 2020. It's going to be a spectacular year. That's going to be the soaring 20s. And I bet you that when we get about halfway through it, we say, damn. Nice to see you looking so fit, guy, in spite of the coughing.
Well, thank you so much. Well, you've been very good to me over the years on almost any topic whatsoever at all, and you have a brain that is the envy of many, but you are so very unique.
I seriously doubt that. Hey, look, this is what it's under.
It's all good. I'm sure we will reconvene at some point in this 2020, and thank you again for your time.
Sure. Great talking with you. Bye.
Bye-bye.